Money, 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 money. Money, 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 money.
As promised, we are continuing our money theme. This week, minimum wage. A few of you have alluded to your opinion on minimum wage in previous critical thinking questions. Some of you think we need to go higher, we're not getting paid enough, and others are fearful that if we raise minimum wage, it could ruin the economy. This week, let's take a look at what both sides say about the minimum wage. Maybe by the end of this video, you'll think, see, I knew it, I was right. Or you'll start to consider what the other side is offering. I like this topic because I feel like a lot of you have kind of some current interest invested in it. You might be working a minimum wage job, so it could directly impact you. But let's take a look at some viewpoints across the political spectrum. Those on the left, liberals, progressive, Democrats, socialists, they advocate for a higher minimum wage. They state that it's going to help lift people out of poverty. When you go to the right, conservatives, Republicans, they state that too high an increase in the minimum wage will hurt job creation and make things more expensive, thus stifling economic growth. Libertarians, they believe that there should be no minimum wage. They think it hurts the economy like conservatives, but they also think that it's immoral to outlaw jobs in any way. I'm going to show you two videos, one from the left, one from the right, offering you their perspective on minimum wage. Keep in mind, they're both biased opinions. However, they're also both giving you facts. And so it's for you to take those facts and decide which side you agree with more. It's so easy to only watch videos or read articles that you completely agree with, so you can nod along. But I also think it's almost more important to watch videos and read articles and talk to people who disagree with you, so you can understand where they're coming from. So let's take a look. We'll start first with the left-wing perspective on minimum wage.
This is an American sweatshop. They flourished in the early 1900s when people were desperate for work. And since there were no regulations on what they had to pay, they paid workers next to nothing. So the U.S. adopted something that had already worked in other countries, a minimum wage. This is a chart of the minimum wage in the United States over the past 60 years. You can see how it's gone up and up and up, from $1 an hour in 1960 to $7.25 today. Go America, right? But this chart is actually pretty misleading. If you take the same line but adjust it for inflation, you'll see the problem. Every time the minimum wage has been raised, inflation has dragged it right back down. Really, America's minimum wage hasn't gone up. It's essentially stayed the same since the 80s. What you're seeing here, this constant up and down, this is weird. It's not how the rest of the world does it, and it leads to a bunch of problems for American workers and businesses. But it doesn't have to be this way.
The minimum wage sets the smallest amount that a business anywhere in the country can pay its workers each hour.
But when that first bill became law in 1938, it had one big problem.
That first law didn't actually set any kind of guidance on when and how you're supposed to raise the minimum wage in the future.
That meant that if the minimum wage was going to go up, Congress would have to pass a new law. That's what these steps are. But as we already know, they aren't occurring enough to keep up with inflation. And this system also makes the U.S. minimum wage sort of unpredictable. Look at this period. Starting in 1997, the minimum wage sat at $5.15 an hour for 10 years. Then it was raised in 2007 to $7.25 by 2009. Cool, but that's a 40% increase in a pretty short time, after a decade of inaction. How do you plan for that if you own a business?
Not having that consistency does raise a lot of problems for business owners. Will they have to lay off employees? Will they have to reduce work hours? Or will they just raise prices on their customers?
Imagine how much smoother that could all go if the minimum wage just kind of went up over time. Well, we don't have to imagine it. In France, they automatically raise their minimum wage every single year. They tie it to inflation and the average salary of a French worker. In Australia, a commission reviews the minimum wage every year, considering economic factors like inflation. The UK also has a commission, made up of union, business, and economic experts. The Czech Republic's commission consults with employer and union representatives. Their line is lower overall than America's, but it still trends upwards. Same with Costa Rica, and their committee reviews the minimum wage twice a year. In most countries, the minimum wage is in the hands of economic officials. In the U.S., it's in the hands of politicians. And that goes about as well as you'd expect.
Today, the federal minimum wage is a poverty wage.
Last thing we need are more one-size-fits-all Washington mandates.
It could eliminate up to 3.7 million jobs.
It would lift 1.3 million Americans out of poverty.
Raise the wage for 33 million people, a quarter of the workforce.
Those wages are only available if you get hired.
Working people are doing their jobs. Let us do ours.
Republicans have generally resisted increasing the minimum wage. They tend to support a lot of pro-business policies, and the business leaders do not want minimum wage increases. Democrats, on the other hand, they have a lot of support from labor unions, so they're the ones who are usually pushing for an increase to the minimum wage.
So that's why Congress rarely agrees on raising the minimum wage, and what makes America's system different than other countries. This chart shows how much a minimum wage worker makes compared to the average worker in every developed country with a minimum wage. All these countries have some kind of commission or formula to determine what the minimum wage should be, and they review it every year or two. And then there's the US, who does neither and is dead last. If the US had done something similar, like tie the minimum wage to the average wage each year, we'd be here. Not amazing, but not an outlier. What we're talking about is the federal minimum wage, which applies to everyone who works in America. But states can set their own too, and about half of them currently have a higher minimum wage than the federal one, like Washington State, which in 1998 decided to raise theirs every single year based on inflation. Sound familiar?
I mean, it's such a logical idea. It's done in other countries. It really doesn't make sense why it's not done at the federal level. Like, really, it's just about politics.
Right now, politicians are yet again debating what the minimum wage should be. Should it be $15, $11, or should it not be raised at all? But maybe the solution to this never-ending debate is to take the decision out of politicians' hands.
Now, let's see what the right has to say.
5 years ago, Seattle became the first city to pass a $15 minimum wage.
I think it's pretty awesome since I benefit from it.
The rising tide raises all boats.
15 in Seattle is just a beginning. We have an entire world to win. Solidarity.
When the law passed, we went to Seattle to interview people about it.
It's a good thing that we're leading the way for the rest of the country.
I wish that it was all over the place, not just Seattle.
Increasingly, it is.
New York State taking steps towards a $15 an hour minimum wage.
Other states and lots of cities have copied Seattle.
California Governor Jerry Brown signed a $15 minimum wage bill.
But now the results from Seattle are in. Some people are being paid more. They're the winners. But for many people who wanted jobs,
the increased minimum wage is having an opposite effect.
Costing thousands of jobs and actually hurting low-income workers.
You see it on this graph. The green line tracks the number of new jobs created in Washington State. The red line is new jobs in Seattle. Once Seattle raised its minimum to $15, entry-level job growth stalled.
It's really presented by minimum wage advocates as a win-win. It's a win-win for employers. It's a win-win for workers. And, there are no negatives.
But there are negatives, says Erin Shannon of the Washington Policy Center. She points to stories like this one, where the owner used to hire kids and train them. But once Seattle raised the minimum, she stopped hiring beginners.
The politicians in Seattle especially have no sense whatsoever about what it means to small businesses like us.
Most people we interviewed said the politicians are right.
Yes, some people will go out of business, others will take their place.
It's something we need to do.
It's as if they've never learned about supply and demand.
Minimum wage actually hurts my chances of getting employed.
This 20-year-old understands the effect better than Seattle's politicians did.
Raising the minimum wage causes increased unemployment.
Rigel Novakoza is one of the $1,500 winners of a video contest done by my classroom charity.
My name is Dylan Hodes, and this is my Wage Rage.
Dylan Hodes won the high school video contest. He mentioned a friend who worked at Kroger until her store raised its minimum to $12.
She was getting paid $12 an hour, but slowly but surely they started cutting her days, her hours. She was regulated to only working on Sundays. And that's because she was young and inexperienced. I feel the big thing...
She wasn't worth $12.
She wasn't worth $12 to Kroger. She's worth the world to me, but she wasn't worth $12 to Kroger.
I learned things from their videos, like how many wealthy countries have no minimum wage.
countries such as Iceland, Norway, Sweden, and Switzerland.
Nobody knows that.
No, and especially with Switzerland,
which has much lower unemployment than America, partly because Switzerland has no minimum.
It stops us from actually getting a job.
Esther Rhodes won the high school essay contest. Her essay pointed out that America's first minimum wage laws were racist. At the time, blacks were often paid less, but they were more likely to be employed than whites.
The whites were like, hey, they're getting all the jobs. This isn't fair.
Congressman Allgood said he hoped the minimum wage would stop cheap colored labor in competition with white labor. So although Americans think the minimum was invented to help needy people,
it was meant for the opposite, to keep the poor and the minorities from getting jobs.
And today it still keeps entry-level workers from finding work. But the politicians don't understand the downside.
Lift up the minimum wage to at least $15 an hour.
Raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour.
It's easy to see why a higher minimum wage is so popular.
On the surface, you think, oh, this is a great idea.
Because it raises some people's wages.
Everybody deserves a living wage.
But while it helps some, it harms many others, especially young people who may now not be offered their first job.
I'm 14, it'd be very difficult for me to find a job. My labor wouldn't be worth $15 an hour.
If only politicians were as smart as those kids.
Keep in mind, we're generally talking about the federal minimum wage, meaning the federal government says that no state, no employer can set the wage below $7.25. Because of federalism, however, states are able to go higher than $7.25. In Ohio, for instance, the minimum wage is set at $8.80. Let's take a look at the rest of the United States. If you don't count Washington, D.C.'s $15 an hour minimum wage, California has the highest in the country at $14 per hour. The state of Washington has $13.69 per hour, and Massachusetts is currently at $13.50 per hour. Like the videos touched on, those who are in support of raising the minimum wage argue that the cost of living has dramatically increased in the last few years, and it's insane that we're still sitting at a minimum wage from 2009. However, those who are against raising the minimum wage, they say that too high of a minimum wage would strain small businesses and employers who don't collect enough revenue to offset these high wage requirements. Some studies actually argued that to keep up with the current cost of living, minimum wage should be $21.72 an hour. Let's take a look, though, at what the cost of living looks like in Licking County and how much minimum wage should be to be able to live in Licking County. This living wage calculator is actually pretty helpful if you are considering relocating after graduation. I know sometimes during this section of our course or in financial algebra, you are required to take a look at what apartment rent is and gas prices and groceries to see if you could actually live off your current wage. According to this website, as a single adult without any children in Licking County, you would need to be making about $14 an hour, working 40 hours a week in order to be able to survive, in order to be able to pay your rent, in order to be able to pay for any transportation needs, food, which is a huge part or bulk of our salary. A minimum wage, however, right now in Ohio is $8.80, so not quite hitting it there. This website also lists an average of the typical annual salaries for different areas of occupation in Licking County. And again, I think this could be a cool website to use if you wanted to search another location, if you were looking to relocate to a different state or a different county within Ohio. My friend and her husband actually live outside of San Francisco with their 3 boys, and they say that if they were to move back to Ohio, they would be extremely wealthy and could afford a really big house in a really nice neighborhood. But because of the cost of living outside of San Francisco, they're in a much smaller house, and they don't consider themselves wealthy at all. But going back to those who are fearful that if we raise the minimum wage too high, it would ruin businesses, they also consider that minimum wages aren't meant to support a family. They're not meant to go and live on your own. A minimum wage job is kind of a stepping stone to get to a better job, so that you can go to school, or you can do an apprenticeship, or you can get some certifications so that you are able to make a living wage. And minimum wage is not the equivalent to a living wage. I don't know. Since I just mentioned certifications, I didn't want to record this video without mentioning something I heard on the news last week, and that is that there has been a bill introduced in Ohio that would reduce the amount of hours required for barbers and cosmetologists to receive their license. And I thought that would be interesting. And I thought it was interesting because we were just talking about that last week with occupational licensing. And so right now there is legislation in Ohio's House that would reduce the number for barbers from 1,800 hours down to 1,000. And for cosmetologists, you are required 1,500 hours of training. It would cut that out, that requirement down to 1,000 hours as well. So keep an eye on that, especially those of you in cosmetology. Correction, it's been introduced in the Senate. And so if you remember our previous lessons on bills becoming a law, if something is introduced in the Senate, it would have to pass the Senate, then it would go to the House. And if it passes the House, it would then go to the governor, who could sign or veto that into law. All right, so I've given you some input kind of from both sides on what they think about minimum wage. And so I am curious as to what you think when it comes to that debate. Let's talk about what else you'll be doing this week.
Hi, I'm Morgan Spurlock, and in my movie Super Size Me, I explored the issue of obesity by eating nothing but McDonald's for 30 days straight. Over the course of my experiment, I went through a physical, mental, and emotional transformation that was like living somebody else's life. But it got me thinking, what if you could live someone else's life for just 30 days? After all, America's a big country with lots of different people. Is it possible we could all learn something from each other? I mean, would you feel comfortable as a Christian walking in a Muslim shoes for 30 days? What if you were a straight man living in a gay man's world? Would it change who you are? Say you drank like a college student for a month. Would you flunk out of life? In this series, we'll find out. And I'm going to kick it off with an issue many Americans deal with every day. Minimum wage.
Minimum wage! Yeah!
Millions of Americans work full-time jobs and still live below the poverty line. How do they survive? Could I do it? Well, we'll find out as I try to live on minimum wage for the next 30 days.
Hey buddy, I'm still waiting.
Yeah, you want fries with that?
So a few things about this video. It is slightly dated. In fact, Morgan and his girlfriend or fiance in the video got married, had kids, and are now divorced. So there's that. I think it's cool though because it was recorded in Columbus, Ohio. So those of you who are familiar with the area, you might spot some stores or streets that you've actually been to. And I just think that this is a cool video to watch. Yes, there's going to be some things that are unrealistic, but it's showing some struggles that people have when they are forced to live on minimum wage. Also, another thing about this video I have to mention is the only way to watch it on Edpuzzle and to watch it on YouTube anymore is with this like little screen at the bottom. So it looks a little funny, but you can still watch it and the quality in terms of sound and picture is good. It's just a little smaller than we might like. So anyway, that's one of the assignments. The video is a little bit longer because it's like considered an episode, but I think it's cool to watch. Whenever I've shown it in class, I actually have the DVD series of the 30 days. Students seem pretty into it. Maybe you've seen where he eats McDonald's every day for 30 days. But anyways, keep in mind, as I've mentioned before, with all Edpuzzle videos, you can stop and pick it up later. So you might start it in your first academic support period. You're not going to get through it maybe. So just pick up where you left off. It'll let you fast forward through any of the questions that you already answered. Let's talk about the other assignment you're going to be doing, which is not a Google form or a critical thinking question. I'm changing things up this week. You will actually, much like he did in the video, play a game in which you are left with only $1,000 and you have to live for 30 days on minimum wage. And so let me show you on the website. It's called playspent.org, but you are going to actually pretend that you are trying to live on minimum wage. I have this linked on the assignment. It'll be on Google Classroom, but you could also just go to playspent.org to play the game. So we're going to continue to spend, and we're going to accept the challenge. And so it's going to tell you about all of the unemployment, and you're going to imagine that you are newly unemployed, you don't have any money in savings, you only have $1,000, you've lost your house, and our go-to for people who are unemployed is get a job. And so we're going to get a job and see if we can make it through the month. So you're going to find a job. When you click on that, it will give you 3 different options. So you can work a warehouse job, second shift. I should also mention you also have a child. You have 1 child, and you're a single parent. So you can work a warehouse job, second shift. It's $9 an hour. you're working 12 to 7, but you do have to be able to lift 20 pounds and you do have to have reliable transportation. The other option is to be a server. You're going to be working, the hours are going to vary. There's no regular schedule, which is pretty regular when you're working in restaurant business. And then you are making $2.13 an hour plus tips. And then your last option is to be an office temp. And so they are hiring only temporary, but they are hiring. You get paid $9 an hour and you're. So let's go ahead and take this office temp job, $9 an hour, and see what happens. So our monthly pay is based on 40 hours per week. And so this is going to be your best case scenario, is that you are going to take home every week $306. And again, this could be less, right? They're saying it's 40 hours a week, but it's a temp job. So they may on a Thursday say, you know what, we don't need you tomorrow. And then you're not going to take home this amount. But for the point of this game, they are going to let you earn that money each week. So you will be getting paid each month $14.40, and then there's a little over $200 in taxes. So monthly, you are taking home $1,224, weekly $306. So now we have some insurance requirements we have to look at. The Affordable Care Act does require that we get health insurance. Our child is covered by the state, so we don't have to pay health insurance for our child, but we do have to pay it for ourselves. So this is going to be your first decision after you pick a job, is which health insurance plan do you want? Do you want a $329 a month plan, which means every time you visit the doctor, you only have a $15 copay? Do you want the silver plan? Copay goes up. Do you want the bronze plan? And so you'll notice when you pay less per month, your copay or your out-of-pocket pay every time you go to the doctor goes out. Or you can opt out and then you pay $12 a month in penalty, but you don't have insurance. I'm pretty healthy. I'm working in an office job, so I'm going to opt out. Next, we have to find a place to live. And so you may notice the closer you get to a bigger city or to like the center of a city, the more your rent will be, but then your travel costs go down. And so you're going to have to decide, do you want to pay less a month for rent, but then potentially more in travel costs, whether that be gas or car insurance or bus, or do you want to live closer to the city or closer to your job, we'll say at this point, and then you don't have to pay as much monthly on travel costs, right? If you pay $850 in rent, you're only paying $5 in travel costs. If you pay $600 in rent, you're paying $160 in travel costs. And so you're going to decide what you want to do, what you want to spend each month on your living situation, where that's a bulk of the money that people spend is on where they live. And keep in mind, again, we're only making about, I can't even remember now, $1,200 a month with our job. I wanted to give you an example of one of the scenarios that you might be faced with. So it says you've been putting off doing laundry for weeks because you don't have a washer or dryer. What do you want to do? And for some of us who have our own washer and dryer, this is a non-issue. Maybe we don't have time to wash and dry, or maybe we never fold and put them away, but we kind of have grown accustomed to the fact that we can wash and dry our clothes whenever we want. If you just move into a new apartment and they don't have one attached, you have to decide. Do you go to the laundromat, which is going to cost $30? Do you wear dirty clothes? Or do you ask a friend for help? And I just wanted to give you guys an idea. The reason this is here is it's for this website to get some free advertisement. So if you click the Facebook or the Twitter, it'll actually ask you if you want to post to your Facebook or Twitter page. So you can do that if you'd like, but this is the example of the type of scenario that you are going to be faced with. So I've been playing this game all month. I've made it to day 30. I've gotten only 2 strikes at my job. So fortunately, I haven't lost my job yet, but I've had to make some sad choices for my kid and for myself. I've had to turn down some social engagements, and it's day 30, and I have 2 bills to do today. My cell phone bill, which is $75, my car insurance, which is $100. I can pay them both, or I could borrow money from a friend, which, as I mentioned before, is actually asking you to post on Facebook or Twitter. And so sometimes, as we know, people have to make a decision. Are they only going to pay one, or are they only going to pay the other, or will they pay them both? So I am going to opt to pay my car insurance because I need that to get to work and see what happens. And so it says that now my cell phone has been disconnected. When payday comes, I can reconnect. But now, and this is what happens too, even though I didn't spend the $75 at that time. Now I'm going to have to spend $100. I'm going to have to spend the $75 on the bill plus a reconnect fee. And I'll be without my cell phone. So if my job needs to get a hold of me, or my children's parents or children's teacher needs to get a hold of me, I'm out of luck. And so I can pay that $100 to make this go away, but maybe not. So here's where you're going to then screenshot your results. So once you've made it to day 30, or if you don't make it that far, maybe play again, you're going to screenshot this screen. You just press Control and then the window capture bar, and it will capture it. You can copy to clipboard, and then you're going to paste it in to your assignment, which I'll show you next. Again, some of you have just taken a picture of your computer screen. And so if that's easier for you with your phone, you're more than welcome to do that as well. I just want to see how far you this on your Chromebook and you copied the link, you can just very simply right click or 2-click and paste it, or Control V, and that will paste the screenshot there. Or you can go to Insert Image and then upload it from the computer. And if you had just taken the screenshot, it should be the first document on your Chromebook. And so you will just paste it in there. I like to kind of cut out some of the extra stuff, but you don't have to do that. And so that is showing me how far you got. You'll also notice, I know it's hard to see on this one, it says that I did make it through the month with $840, but if I were to continue the game the very next day, or if I were to continue in life the very next day, it's day 2, or it's day 1, and now my rent's bill, and I have to start this challenge all over again. You'll go to the next slide, and I have 5 questions that I want you to answer about your experience playing the game. All right, so that is it. You have this Edpuzzle video, you have the 30 days on minimum wage Edpuzzle video, and then you have the spent game to play. And that's it for the week. I hope you've enjoyed your week off from a critical thinking question or a Google form, but I'm sure we'll be back next week, and let's make it a great week.